Good morning, Bama fans. It is a more somber Thursday morning than the ones that we have greeted you on so far here on Bammers. It's been a very long time since Alabama has lost a football game, and in fact, we weren't doing this show yet the last time Alabama lost a football game. It was quite a long time ago. You have to go all the way back to 2019, November of 2019, and I think it's almost been such a long time, Ben, that it felt unfamiliar to watch it take place as it happened. It was a sort of surreal moment to realize that Alabama was losing a football game. That's how long it's been since we've seen that happen, and we'll get into the specifics of it. But just before we dive into the show today, Ben, take me back to last Saturday night and kind of at what point did it dawn on you, I guess, that this could actually happen, that Alabama was not going to pull this out?
When it was 38-38 and Alabama could not convert and they went 3 and out with 3 minutes to go. When they went 3 and out with 3 minutes to go, that's when I knew that they were probably not going to win the game, right? Or that it might happen because, Alabama fans, even after this long dominant run, they don't want to go to overtime. No Alabama fan wants to go to overtime, and they think we're going to lose if it goes to overtime. I'm sure everybody has that feeling, but Alabama fans especially, you can go back to the kick six if you want to, where it's like you're playing for that 1 second. I think most Alabama fans would probably take that 1 second and take that kick or even a Hail Mary at that point. They didn't want to go to overtime. So I felt the same way the other night. But look, even when it was 24-10, having watched Saban teams go down big against teams like South Carolina, Texas A&M in 2012, against Ole Miss in 2014 and 2015, that Alabama at some point is going to claw their way back into the game, and they're going to make it very hard for that team to put them away. The only exception really is the Clemson National Championship game, the only time we've ever seen a Nick Saban team get whipped, right, and just have no answer. So I knew Alabama, they're just too good. Nick Saban has been in those situations enough where he can coach them up and make the adjustments that are necessary to get them back in the game. And he did. And Alabama put themselves in a position to win the game. When Alabama went up 38-31, I'm sure a lot of people thought, wow, okay, this was scary, but Alabama's going to escape with a win in Texas A&M. But, look, Texas A&M had an amazing game plan, and they never stopped competing too. You would think, after blowing a lead like that, they might just give Alabama the game and say, okay, well, we did our best. We gave Alabama our best shot, but it's over now. They came back and beat us. This is why they're the number one team, right? But no, they kept competing, and Alabama's defense had no answer for them, certainly in the first half. They played great out of the gate in the third quarter and held Texas A&M pretty well, and other than that kickoff return and other than the last 2 minutes of the game. So Alabama deserves a lot of credit for continuing to compete in the game, getting back into it, taking the lead. But when they went 3 and out and couldn't make the plays there with just 3 minutes to go, and they had plenty of time to run the clock, to move the ball, that's when I kind of knew that the dark cloud was there to stay.
Yeah, and I think it's been interesting seeing everybody process their feelings about what happened here, and it's been very different. It's kind of all over the map, and that's what we talk about here every week on Bammers. Primarily, we're a show that's more about fans and fan reactions to things, and we kind of dove right into it there, Ben. But I want to welcome everybody who's been joining the last few minutes as we've started the show on Thursdays, as we always do on Bammers, presented by the Mercedes-Benz Tech Program. We put your comments here on the screen with us. We want you guys to be a part of the show, and you guys are already doing a great job of that. You are diving right into this discussion, and we asked in the post here, wherever you're watching this, whether you thought this was more of a disaster or a turning point, and I'm seeing both answers honestly coming through. And of course, we're not really going to know that until we get through the season, Ben. But I think it's really interesting to see how Bama fans are handling this loss very differently. I think I'm seeing a lot of fans sort of throw their hands up almost. I mean, I don't think they're giving up, but they're saying we knew this was going to happen. I was worried about this happening. This is a sign of how weak our team is and all the issues that our team has. And I'm seeing other people kind of saying this actually had to happen, that this isn't really necessarily a sign of actual deficiencies on the team itself, but more a sign of this team wasn't taking their job seriously enough, and something like this was necessary to get them out of it. I'm kind of curious about where you fall on that dividing line, Ben.
Look, I mean, it's helped before with Alabama teams, right? Like if you go back to 2012, that Texas A&M game obviously changed their attitude and gave them more of a serious outlook in terms of controlling their own destiny, having their national championship hopes right in front of them. Everything is still right in front of Alabama right now. If they win out, they're the national champions. If they win out the regular season, they win the West. They go to Atlanta. They play Georgia. They beat Georgia. They're in the playoff, right? So it's all right there. But it just eliminates the margin of error. Like there's literally none at this point. And so you look at it like that and think, well, maybe it wasn't necessary for it to happen. Maybe they should have taken an undefeated, because we were talking about it pretty recently, Matt. If Alabama and Georgia are undefeated in the SEC championship game, most people are probably convinced that they're both guaranteed spots in the college football playoff. That's off the table for Alabama at this point, and everybody knows that. So they couldn't really afford to lose it if they didn't want that margin of error, but here we are. So it hurts. Every loss really hurts, especially when you can see it coming. But as all these commenters are pointing out, this can help. Saban takes these things, what he calls, his whole mantra is don't waste a failure, right? Like don't waste a failure. And we might get to Nick Saban's comments a little later on, but this is their opportunity, like these folks are saying, for Alabama to get right. Guys like Will Anderson, who have been vocal leaders about focusing, getting serious, making football the most important thing in terms of in the context of football. So, it definitely hurt, but I think it's one of those things. You hear Alabama fans say it all the time. Act like you've been there before. Right. And so, I would just say act like you've been there before. Alabama fans have seen these losses, and they've seen it translate into national championship winning seasons. So I would just say the sky is not falling yet. There is still hope for a national championship. So be patient. Like as Aaron Rodgers would say, relax.
Yeah, and as Scott Clark points out here in this comment, only two Nick Saban teams have actually won national championships after undefeated seasons. We know that that's not the case for most of them. We actually have an example or two of a team going through the entire regular season undefeated and then losing, in the playoffs or in the national championship game. So it's even though we certainly think of perfection as being the standard for Alabama and as being the sign of a dominant team, the evidence is actually more on the other side. It's actually, we have more examples of a team winning a national title at Alabama under Nick Saban after losing a game first than we do the opposite. So I at a certain point, it makes you wonder, is that even a coincidence? Is that almost, again, a necessary motivating factor? And I know it's hard. It's very easy for all of us to say, you're the better team. You should win every game. Anyway, you shouldn't need extra motivation. But the truth is, a lot of what Nick Saban focuses on and talks about is playing with intensity. And that makes a big difference in a game like football, where physicality is such a huge part of it. It really isn't just about standing in the right place at the right time. You have to move other people physically with your body, and that means effort is a huge factor. So I do really wonder if having that scenario, Ben, where, everybody is talking about it in the fan base, and I'm sure the players are aware of it too, of saying we actually we actually can make it to the playoffs without even trying hard. Like, we're not going to be challenged here. If that would change how much effort you're giving with your body in these situations compared to having it in your mind and being aware that we cannot fail. If we let up, if we make a mistake again, we're out of it. We're not going to be able to accomplish any of the stuff we want to accomplish. I think there's pretty clear. I think a lot of folks want to be dismissive of this idea, but I think that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, it does, Matt. I think there are two things I'm thinking about, right? Because you either are talking about the players, right, and their focus, and now they know they can be beaten. They almost got beat by Florida. It almost happened on the road there. Then they go on the road to another hostile environment, got beat. So they know they're going to get the other team's best shot for the most part, like especially if you're playing competitive teams like Florida, like Texas A&M, potentially like Mississippi State, who's very good on offense, and it's another road game. And so Alabama is going to have to bounce back in a major way, and people might laugh off the fact that it's Mississippi State, right? But I don't think a lot of people thought Alabama was going to have problems at College Station last week. So we're still kind of understanding, we're still kind of figuring out the identity of this team. I'm sure the team is too. But then you go back to the whole, well, whose fault is it really, right? When people try to play the blame game, Alabama was in a position to win that game, right? They were up by a touchdown pretty late in the game. They were tied with the ball late in the game and couldn't convert on offense, couldn't make a stop on defense. And so that, puts the spotlight on Bill O'Brien in terms of his red zone play calling, on Pete Golding in terms of his schemes for stopping a backup quarterback against a Texas A&M team that has been struggling on offense. So, you can get into the blame game all you want. Were the players focused enough? Are they competitive enough? Do they have the intensity to finish a game like Nick Saban wants them to? But, at that point, it's over. It's time to compete. It's time to move on. It's time to finish the season undefeated if they want to win a national championship. So I would think that after these tests now, and especially after a loss, the team probably has the focus that it needs, right? Like, I think that Saban's message is probably loud and clear. The fans have certainly been loud and clear in terms of what's at stake, and I'm sure nobody knows it better than the players at this point.
Yeah, an interesting question here from Timothy Dowdle on YouTube, who says, should we root for Texas A&M the rest of the season since we lost to an unranked team? Might be a factor for the playoff committee on deciding for one-loss teams being accepted. I'll say this, Timothy. It's kind of a unique year for it because so many of the other teams in college football right now already have a loss. And I'd hate to be underestimating or disrespectful of some of the remaining undefeated teams, but I think it's probably highly unlikely that you're going to have 4 undefeated teams at the end of the season from power conferences at this point. It's not very – this has turned into one of those years where there's been enough early chaos that one-loss teams really don't have anything to worry about if they can win their Power 5 conference.
Matt, this is simple, though. This is simple. If Alabama has one loss when the playoff committee is deciding who should get in, that will mean they have beaten Georgia.
Correct.
And that they have won the SEC championship. So that's a guarantee spot in the college football playoff. So
I agree with you, Ben.
So, again, if Alabama wins out, it doesn't matter what Texas A&M does. It doesn't matter what the other teams do, how bad LSU is. If they win out, if they beat Georgia and Atlanta, and they have one loss, they're going to the college football playoff.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to remove that concern about Texas A&M being a bad loss because nobody else could possibly have a win as good as beating Georgia. So, but yeah, I mean, there's only 2 ways that this goes. Either Alabama has the best win in college football this year and they're in the playoffs, or they lose another game and we're not even worried about having this playoff conversation because they're definitely not getting in at that point. Might not even be able to win the West with 2 losses going forward at this point. So, yeah, they have to play flawless for the rest of the season. They can't afford any more losses. They shouldn't lose any more games, but we said last week they shouldn't lose to Texas A&M, and they did. So I think it's in some ways, even though we're kind of used to, after Alabama loses, we're used to having to look at all these scenarios and saying, who else needs to lose? Okay, how many teams in front of Alabama need to take a loss, and does it have to be the right loss, and all these things? I think it's a lot simpler picture this year because of the fact that so many teams that would be in contention with Alabama for a spot have already lost a game. We've already seen Clemson have 2 losses. Ohio State dropped one. Oregon dropped one. I don't know that anybody particularly believes that Oklahoma is going to make it through the season unscathed at this point. So it's just turned out, and this is sort of the bullet point below us here about how bad does this loss actually hurt. Even though I think it's very humbling, obviously, and Alabama is not used to losing games, this is a scenario where the negative consequences for this loss are maybe some of the least harmful to this team's national championship hopes of any regular season loss I can think of in the Saban era, Ben. Almost all the other ones that you go back and look at, it really cost Alabama something. They needed a lot of stuff to go their way for it to work out in the end. This one, again, we talked about, it removes the margin of error, but other than that, it doesn't really cost them anything.
Yeah, it's simple arithmetic, right? Like, as opposed to the old days, I say the old days, like the 2010s are old days, but first of all, this reminds me of 2 losses. It can be either one or the other. It can be the South Carolina loss, right, where Steven Garcia had the big game and you lost to this team on the road. You go on to have 3 losses for that season, and it's just basically a rebuilding year, if you can imagine, for Alabama. Or is it the Texas A&M game in 2012, where they lost to Texas A&M? They play a quarterback played an amazing game, and Alabama refocused, got back on track, went on to win the national championship. Now, back in those days, Matt, especially the 2012 year, Alabama has 1 loss. They needed a lot of things to happen, right? Like in the rest of the college football landscape. And so after that loss, we had no idea if Alabama was on a path to the national championship. They would need this team to lose, that team to lose. In this case, what makes it so different is even with the loss, like you said, the consequences are much different. And Alabama has everything right in front of them. We know that even after the loss. As it was happening, it's if Alabama loses this game, they're just going to have to win out for the rest of the year, but they can still win the national championship. So that does make it a little different. It's certainly more stressful now. Every game is going to have a little more meaning, I think, including the Mississippi States, including a down LSU. All of those games are going to matter, and they can't get as competitive as those. If they do, Alabama's got to walk away with the W, or else they're going back to the Citrus Bowl.
And I know we don't like to talk about I know Alabama fans sometimes like to think that hey, we don't think about Auburn all the time, right? That's them. They do that to us. But I'm going to tell you, the folks over at Auburn, when this happened, they took a pretty hard L over the weekend, and then they went home that night and they watched Alabama lose to Texas A&M, and they're all, I'm telling you, because I produce our sister show, Tiger Takes, they're all thinking right now, hey, we're right back in this thing. The SEC West is wide open. We've got one conference loss, and that means that we still control our own destiny. And look, that may not be the case by the time the Iron Bowl arrives, but it does in some ways, Ben, I think, give the rest of the SEC West this little bit of scent of blood in the water when they're playing Alabama. Not that they don't get excited to play Alabama already, but I think there is a little bit more hope, a little bit more enthusiasm from other teams in the SEC West when they see Alabama on the schedule and think, hey, we just saw Texas A&M do it. Why not us?
You remember when Rocky cut Drago for the first time and Rocky
Right.
fought, and it's like he bleeds, right? He bleeds.
Yeah.
Or like, when you get the shields down on Death Star, it's vulnerable. Those movies didn't end well for those 2 things that I'm comparing Alabama to. So I realized that. But, yeah, I think you're right. Blood in the water. The rest of the SEC West can sense that Alabama is beatable. They've proven it a couple of times now. And in Auburn's case, if you want another piece of precedent, go back to 2010, right? The Cam Newton season. what was Alabama hoping to do that day in the Iron Bowl? They were hoping to ruin Alabama's season. So even if Auburn isn't competitive in the SEC West by the end of the season, what they have to play for, if Alabama continues to win, is ruining Alabama's season. If Alabama loses that Iron Bowl, playoff is off the table, right? And Auburn can be responsible for that, just like Alabama nearly was during the Cam Newton season. So the stakes could not be higher, Matt. And so all you Alabama fans out there who say you want better games and you don't want boring games out there, you got it. You got your wish. Here we are now. You got great games. The stakes couldn't be higher. Alabama cannot afford – there is no margin for error. They cannot afford to lose again. So I hope you're happy, folks. I like boring games. I like unfun games. To me, unfun games are fun. Not the last game. That was a different kind of unfun game, right? But I like blowouts. I like to not worry the rest of the night and just see what the done Pac-12 and all these other teams are doing so that, there's another Alabama blowout under the belt. So fun games, not fun. So, yeah, that's kind of where I stand with this, Matt. That's why it hurt because, you'd almost rather watch a blowout, to be honest with you. Rip the Band-Aid off.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's frustrating to watch this team fall behind as far as they did and then come back, right? And tie the game back up and even take a lead. Because it shows you both ends of the spectrum. It shows you how good this team can be, how much better they can play in one quarter than their opponent, and yet they're still capable of having letdowns and going 6 possessions without scoring a touchdown, things that we don't typically see from Alabama. So it's the frustration of seeing unfulfilled potential. There's the frustration of you're one of these teams that has played Georgia this year, let's say, and you just know from the get-go, we've got no shot of winning this game. We're just getting our butts kicked all over the field. Those guys are frustrated, but they tend to accept their fate by the end of the quarter, the end of the first quarter. This Alabama team, the frustration comes from seeing how good they can be and then realizing that they still don't play that way for 4 quarters for some reason. So it's a different kind of frustration because there should be a solution right there, and yet they don't seem to be finding it. I think we've seen it with other teams before. I would say the 2016 Alabama team felt very similar to that in a lot of ways, and for most of 2017, there was a lot of discussion about that. And it's ultimately, I think, why Tua ended up coming in at the end of that season. But to see a team that has such clear advantages all over the field, but just doesn't seem to be able to put teams away, has to struggle with for every score. It's a type of frustration only Bama fans really know, but it is in some ways more frustrating, I think, to these fans than just watching your team be clearly inferior to the team they're playing against.
Yeah, man, they looked sluggish out of the gate, certainly in the Texas A&M game, and it's understandable. I mean, you go on the road, you go up against a team in front of an amazing crowd that's fired up to beat Alabama. But I wondered why they were so sluggish, Matt. Alabama's teams often watch movies the night before games, late at night. I wonder if they saw that new James Bond movie. That thing clocks in at 3 hours, Matt. So they could have been in that theater until midnight, falling asleep during that thing. And Lord knows what their mindset was after watching that, if that's in fact what they watch. So that had me wondering, Matt, for sure. But I'm certainly confident. Alabama, we know how good they can be this year, even if they don't have that identity that they're searching for. They're trying to live up to that standard that everybody talks about, that certainly Will Anderson talks about, as Christopher Simmons just pointed out in his Roman Reigns avatar there, that I like. But yeah, I mean, they've got to live up to that standard if they want to compete for a national championship for the rest of the year. If they make it to that Georgia game, are they going to be able to compete with Georgia? Georgia certainly has looked very impressive so far, Matt. Obviously, so is Alabama still on that level? For a while, the narrative was it's Georgia and Alabama and everybody else.
Right.
And now it's Georgia and everybody else. I know that probably gets under the skin of Alabama fans.
For sure. An unfamiliar territory from the last few years for Alabama to be playing a little bit of an underdog in some ways for the remainder of the season. Not to most of the teams that they actually play against, but in a sort of more national scale. They're going to be outside of that top four, and that's not a place we've seen Alabama too much. We'll see how this team adopts that place for themselves in the national college football landscape.
Yeah,
Ben,
but you avoid complacency that way, though, Matt. I think a lot of Alabama
sure.
fans probably like that. They like playing from behind instead of having that target on. Alabama's always going to have a target on their back no matter what, as long as Nick Saban is there. But you have less of one, certainly, and Georgia becomes the top dog in terms of being the number one team probably for the remainder of the season, depending on what Kentucky does this year. But it reminds me of like what people would say about like Conor McGregor, right? Like when he couldn't win those fights after being number one. It's hard. What do they say? Like it's hard to fight like that when you sleep in silk sheets or whatever, like when the complacency factor, right? Where it's like Alabama's number one, they're the 19-point favorite or whatever it was this past weekend. So what kind of effort do they really have to put into it if they're a 20-point favorite against an unranked team, right? So it's about finding that competitive fire again, and that's the message that Nick Saban has obviously had this week and really for the majority of the season in terms of finding that intensity for four full quarters. So we'll see if they've got it. Mississippi State is pretty good this year.
No question. I don't think this is a team that you want to mess around for another week and trying to figure out, how to do things better and what your identity is against Mississippi State. This is a team that has been a threat to the team that Alabama just lost to, for one thing, but they also have been pretty competitive in every game, even the ones they've lost. And Ben, a couple of commenters that we've pulled up here talked about Will Anderson and his words this week, but I want to talk about Nick Saban's press conferences this week and how I think, for fans who are listening, I think he's kind of shown how much his opinion and his words matter to this fan base. And I think part of what keeps this whole program on track is that they know when Nick Saban is trying to make a point, he's not known for overhyping his team. He's not known for showing concern about things that necessarily aren't worth being concerned about. As a lot of folks have talked about in the comments today, Nick Saban sort of warned everybody about what ended up happening at Texas A&M. He didn't think his team was playing for 4 quarters with intensity. A lot of people disregarded that. They say, "Oh, it's just Nick Saban trying to keep his team motivated when they're blowing other teams out." It didn't turn out to be that way. His concerns turned out to be well-founded. But the other thing about Nick Saban, Ben, is that he doesn't hand out praise very lightly. He doesn't normally hype up his team if he doesn't buy what he's saying. And one thing that we have heard from Saban this week is that he thinks the message might finally be getting through. He seems very encouraged by how the team is practicing this week. He likes their intensity. I think he's also been pretty specific about his feelings about how the game was called last week. I don't think you're ever going to hear him really ream out a coordinator in a press conference, but he kind of came as close as he does to doing that, talking about Bill O'Brien and the way they called the game, particularly near the goal line. I think that Saban feels like things are going to go differently this week. And again, that's always worth noting because Nick Saban doesn't go to a press conference and say everything's going great when he doesn't believe it.
Yeah, man, that red zone offense, and red zone is putting it conservatively, Matt. What did Alabama have at 1st and goal from the 3, and they pass it 3 straight times, and they've got a running back in Brian Robinson who's averaging more than 5 yards a carry for the entire game. I mean, that guy he's proven himself to be a bruiser, okay? And so I think, we went back to those early 2010s, the run the dang ball era mentality that a lot of Bama fans had, and I'm sure that reminded them of that Texas A&M game in 2012 when there was a similar situation. Alabama was like inside the 5, and they call, I think 3 straight pass plays, or at least 2, and there's an interception on the final, I think, 4th down. AJ McCarron's trying to find Kenny Bell out of the backfield, and it's intercepted, basically clinches the game. So William Chun said it all right there. But Matt, I think that this is great though, because all of the commenters who have said that this is an opportunity now for Alabama to sort of regroup and refocus and keep their eye on the ball, so to speak. And Will Anderson obviously said the same thing. But Nick Saban, again, going back to the whole don't waste a failure thing, like he sees everything as a teaching opportunity for the team, especially losses, right? Especially he always preaches about adversity. Like, what do you do in the face of adversity? And Alabama is facing their greatest adversity of the year at this point. And so I think that's an opportunity for him to preach that over and over, to find out, again, if this team, if the team has the Bama factor, if they're going to live up to the Bama standard that they've created throughout the years. And so at his press conference yesterday, which I encourage a lot of Alabama fans to go listen to if they haven't already.
By the way, it's wherever you're watching this. So if you're on Facebook or YouTube, just go scroll down the timeline a little bit and you will see his press conference.
Yeah, Saban got very philosophical. And I think it's always interesting when Saban gets philosophical, because I think that's sort of like how he looks at the game overall. Like, it's like he's looking at the matrix with all those ones and zeros. Saban sort of like, there's like a big picture at outlook that he seems to have that translates on the field in terms of like blocking and tackling and X's and O's. But he is a big picture guy. If you do all of these things the right way, then you're going to, reach that goal that you want. The way he put it, if you don't create any value for Alabama, you don't create any value for yourself, in terms of communicating it in a way that speaks to, again, the big picture of winning and losing, respecting winning, finding that competitive fire within yourself. Him talking about how he's competitive basically all the time, 24/7, sort of instilling that mentality into the rest of the team. I think he sees it in a lot of the players like Will Anderson and elsewhere, in terms of, those freshmen. I think he was asked by a reporter yesterday about Ja'Cory Brooks, this freshman who has been a standout on special teams, obviously was in the last game. Him pointing out that there might be some freshmen on the team who don't understand like why being a contributor on special teams will translate to a larger role in the team in the future. Guys like Jordan Battle, Brian Robinson, Josh Jobe, and others who did that thing, who put in their time, and big picture wise, they saw where that would get them to becoming starters, major factors on the team long-term this year, contributing to a potential national championship run. So again, Nick Saban, when he's philosophical, I think that's when he's at his best. And it's obviously the onus is going to be placed on the players at some point to soak that message in like sponges, which they obviously have in the past. And I anticipate that they probably will now, because again, the chips are all down and everything is right in front of them. It's just a matter of cashing in.
Yes, indeed, Ben. So I would encourage everybody to go check out Saban's press conference from yesterday. Very interesting, very compelling stuff. He's always worth watching in a press conference, but coming off of a loss, you start to get some real philosophy coming out of the guy. So it's an interesting time to be a Bama fan, Ben. It's that talk about, I don't know what culture it supposedly comes from, but an ancient curse of saying, may you live in interesting times. Bama fans are in interesting times at the moment. They haven't been for a couple of years now, but we'll see. We'll see how things go. I will say, based on past evidence, when Nick Saban seems confident in his team, coming off of a struggle, off of a hard time, it usually means good things are ahead. But we'll see what it looks like in Starkville. As Saban has pointed out, they've had a lot of really rough games in Starkville over his time, and in Tuscaloosa as well. So it's never been a particularly easy place for Alabama to play, and we'll see if that's the case tomorrow.
Yeah, Matt, whoever dropped that pearl of wisdom probably didn't like boring games either. I like boring games personally, so I disagree with that person in terms of interesting times. May all the times be boring. May all the games be boring for the rest of the 2021 season. That is my hope and wish, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks. Hey, thanks to everybody for commenting today. A ton of really interesting and compelling points being made over here in the comments section. As always, you guys do such a great job with that on Bammers every week, and we love having you guys be a part of the show. We will see you again next week. You can also check in with us on Saturday morning. We always do myself and Simone Eli do a pregame show right here, wherever you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook. We also do a postgame show. But for now, I hope you guys have a good rest of the week. Keep calm, trust the process, and hope you guys get some better news on Saturday. So for Ben Flanagan, I'm Matt Scalisi, and thanks for joining us here on Bammers, presented by the Mercedes-Benz Tech Program, and we will see you guys next week.
This show is presented by the Mercedes-Benz Tech Program. To learn more about Mercedes-Benz's World of Advanced Automotive Technology, text the word Mercedes to 55678 or visit www.learnmercedes.com.